Avery didn't expect anyone to step in when the saleswoman loudly sneered. "This dress isn't in your price range, sweetheart." She froze, her hands still resting on the silk fabric. The boutique had gone silent. Eyes turned. Whispers started. Dylan had money more than anyone in this overpriced store could guess, but in ripped jeans and an old hoodie, she looked like she wandered in by accident. She liked it that way. She'd built her tech company in silence, from her apartment floor, and her wealth wasn't anyone's business. But humiliation? That still stung, no matter how many zeros sat in her accounts. "Hey!" A man's voice cut through the tension. "That how you talk to customers now?" Everyone turned to the entrance, where a tall man stood with a little girl tugging at his hand. His flannel shirt was faded, his jeans worn at the knees, but his tone was sharp and unflinching. The saleswoman blinked. "Sir, this isn't any of your..." She was looking at the dress. "You don't talk to people like that. Especially not in front of my daughter." The little girl, maybe 6 or 7, clutched a stuffed bunny and frowned at the saleswoman with fierce judgment. "You were mean," she said. The woman scoffed and walked off without another word. Dylan blinked, still frozen in place. The man turned to her. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Yeah. Just surprised." He held out a hand. "Tobias Nolan. And this is Zoe." Zoe beamed. "Hi. You're really pretty. Are you a princess?" Dylan let out a laugh and shook Tobias's hand. "I'm Dylan. And no, not a princess. She was a millionaire, actually. Several times over. But she didn't correct the kid." "Come on, Zoe," Tobias said, guiding her past the racks. "We're just here to return a pair of boots. They hurt your feet, remember?" Zoe nodded. "They made my toes cry." Dylan laughed again. It felt weird laughing like that in the middle of a boutique where she'd just been humiliated. But something about Tobias Nolan, his calm, his protectiveness, his easy way with his daughter made her forget the sting. She found herself walking toward the register. "Actually, I'll take the dress." The saleswoman looked like she might choke. "It's $6,000, she said, almost desperately. Dylan didn't flinch. "Put it on my card." As she handed it over, she caught Tobias watching her from the corner. He looked surprised. Outside, she caught up with him. "Hey," she said. "Thank you for stepping in back there." He shrugged, zipping up Zoe's jacket. "Didn't like the way she talked to you. Most people would have just looked away." "I'm not most people." He said it like a fact. Not bragging. Just true. She hesitated. "Can I buy you a coffee? As a thank you?" He looked down at Zoe. "Only if they have hot chocolate." They ended up at a small cafe around the corner. Not fancy. No one stared. No one cared what anyone was wearing. Dylan sipped her cappuccino while Zoe happily demolished a whipped cream mountain. "You live around here?" Dylan asked. Tobias nodded. 2 blocks down. Small walk up. It's just me and her. Single dad? Yeah. He glanced at Zoe, who was humming to herself. Her mom left when she was 3. Haven't seen her since. Dylan's chest tightened. That's rough. He shrugged again, but this time it looked heavier. You do what you gotta do. And what do you do? Construction. I pick up jobs when I can. It's enough. It was her turn to be quiet. He smiled at her across the table. What about you? What do you do? Tech stuff. I work from home mostly. Definitely not a lie. Just a massive understatement. Cool, he said. You're good with computers? You could say that. They talked until Zoe's eyes drooped. Tobias glanced down at his watch. We should get her home. School tomorrow. Dylan stood with them. Well, thanks again. For earlier. He hesitated. You free this weekend? There's a fall fair. Zoe loves the rides. Dylan blinked. You're asking me to the fair? Zoe cut in before he could answer. You should come. There's funnel cake. Tobias chuckled. That's a yes from her. Dylan smiled. Then I guess it's a yes from me too. As they walked away, she watched them, his hand on his daughter's back, her giggling up at him, and something tugged deep in her chest. She hadn't meant to make friends today. She hadn't meant to feel anything at all. But maybe, just maybe, she already was. And Tobias Nolan had no idea he just made a millionaire fall hard. The scent of roasted almonds hit Dylan as soon as she stepped through the fairground gates. It was louder than she'd expected, music playing from tinny speakers, laughter echoing from the bumper cars, parents shouting over the chaos to keep their kids from vanishing into the crowd. She turned in a slow circle, scanning rows of booths and blinking against the colorful blur of lights. Dylan! A voice called behind her. She turned just in time to see Zoe sprint toward her, arms flung wide. Dylan crouched instinctively, catching her in a hug before she could plow into her legs. You came! Zoe's voice was high with excitement. I told Daddy you would. Tobias followed behind at a jog, breathless and slightly winded. She took off the second she spotted you. Sorry, I swear I'm not raising a wild animal. Zoe grinned up at him. You said I could run if I saw her. I said you could wave. Not stage a jailbreak. Dylan laughed, brushing Zoe's curls back from her face. I'm glad she did. I don't think I would have found you in this crowd. Tobias nodded toward the east side of the fairgrounds. We've staked out near the petting zoo. Less chaos. Mostly. They walked together, Zoe skipping between them, her bunny clutched under one arm and a half-eaten caramel apple in her other hand. So, Tobias said, glancing sideways at Dylan, you're not dressed like someone who's afraid of funnel cake grease. She looked down at her boots and oversized sweater. Is that your way of saying I clean up too well for a muddy fairground? It's my way of saying you look good and still somehow sensible. Not an easy combo. They passed a stand selling handmade candles, and Dylan reached for her wallet, buying one with a soft cedar scent before tucking it into her tote. Smells like the woods, she said, noticing the way Tobias inhaled the air around the booth. He nodded. My dad used to take us camping. Before everything got complicated. She didn't press. His voice had dipped for half a second, but his face stayed steady. Instead, Dylan pointed toward a towering ride. Think Zoe's brave enough for that? Tobias followed her gaze to the Ferris wheel. She won't admit it, but she's terrified of heights. I had to talk her down from a 2-step ladder last week. Noted. They reached the animal pens, and Zoe immediately darted toward a pen of bleeding goats. I'll keep an eye on her, Tobias said. You allergic to animals? Nope. Just not a fan of being nibbled. He chuckled. That's fair. They leaned against the wooden railing, watching Zoe shove a handful of pellets toward a stubborn-looking goat. She seems happy, Dylan said. Tobias nodded. She is. Most days. Dylan waited. He didn't seem like the type to open up easily, but the lines around his eyes had deepened. There was a custody fight, he said after a moment. Her mom came back for a bit. Said she wanted to try again. But it was more about control than love. Zoe got caught in the middle. What happened? She lasted 2 weeks. Then she vanished again. Zoe stopped asking after the 3rd day. Dylan didn't speak. She didn't need to. He looked like he'd said more than he meant to, and it hung between them, heavy but honest. I'm sorry, she said quietly. He gave a tight nod. Thanks. I try not to talk about it. Don't want pity. This isn't pity. It's respect. His eyes flicked toward hers, like he wasn't used to hearing that. She reached into her tote and pulled out a little bag. I brought something for Zoe, she said, changing the subject gently. It was a tiny stuffed fox, its ears slightly too big for its head. She handed it over just as Zoe came running back. For me? Zoe's eyes lit up. He looks like he belongs in stories. She said she didn't have enough bedtime animals, Dylan said. Zoe hugged it tight. I'm calling him Maple. Maple? Tobias asked, amused. Because he's orange. Like leaves. Dylan raised an eyebrow at him. Your kid's got taste. She gets it from me. They wandered through the fair for another hour tossing rings at bottles, watching a man juggle fire, letting Zoe ride the carousel twice. Every time Dylan looked at Tobias, she caught some new flicker of him she hadn't seen before. The way he crouched to tie Zoe's shoe without her asking. How he handed her his last piece of fried dough without hesitation. How he never once looked at his phone. Eventually, the sky turned dusky and the lights lit up in earnest. They stood at the edge of the field, near the balloon vendor, while Zoe sat on a bench, content with her new fox and a plastic cup of lemonade. Thanks for coming, Tobias said. I'm glad I did. You're not what I expected, he said slowly. Dylan tilted her head. What did you expect? He hesitated. Someone who looked like you, dressed like you. I figured you'd cancel. Or decide it wasn't worth your time. She didn't respond right away. Her chest tightened, not from offense, but from the sting of knowing he had no idea what she carried. I like real things, she said. This? You and Zoe? This feels real. He looked at her for a long moment. You ever get tired of pretending? That stopped her. What makes you think I'm pretending? Because I do it too, he said. When people assume we're barely getting by, I let them. It's easier than explaining why we don't take handouts. She looked at him, something unspoken tightening between them. Maybe one day I'll tell you who I really am, she said softly. He didn't press. He just nodded. When they parted ways, he walked her to her car, an older model, deliberately chosen to blend in. He glanced at it but said nothing. Drive safe, he said. You too. She hesitated before getting in. Tobias? Yeah? If I asked you to let me take you and Zoe somewhere next weekend, would you say yes? Depends. On what? Is it real? He asked. Or pretending? She met his eyes. Real. Then yeah. I'm in. He walked away without waiting for her to start the engine, Zoe's hand in his, the fox tucked under her arm. Dylan sat behind the wheel for a moment, heart pounding. She hadn't planned any of this. And yet, somehow, it already felt impossible to walk away. The scent of sea salt and grilled lobster drifted across the terrace, carried by the breeze that rolled in off the harbor. Dylan leaned against the railing of the waterfront bistro, watching the boats rock gently in their slips, the sun catching on their white hulls like diamonds scattered across the water. This place is something else, Tobias said behind her, his voice low withal. She turned to see him standing just past the open French doors, a navy button-down rolled at the sleeves, jeans still worn but clean. Zoe stood beside him, wide-eyed, her braids tied with little blue ribbons and a paper crown perched on her head from the kids' menu. Dylan smiled. I figured she deserved something special for her birthday. Zoe looked up at her dad. Can we live here? Tobias laughed, but his eyes flicked to Dylan, more cautious than amused. You didn't have to go all out. It wasn't about going all out, Dylan said. It was about making a memory. Zoe darted to the dessert table, where a small cake with seafoam-colored frosting waited under a glass dome. She pressed her nose to the glass. Tobias walked closer to Dylan, lowering his voice. You rented out the whole place. There's no one else here. She nodded. I didn't want her to feel like an afterthought. He studied her face. You keep doing that. Doing what? Seeing things I don't say out loud. Dylan looked back at the water, heart tight. Maybe I'm just good at reading people. Or maybe you know what getting overlooked feels like. She didn't answer that. Instead, she turned toward Zoe, who was now trying to read the icing letters on her cake. Want to help me light the candles? Dylan asked. Zoe spun around, beaming. Can I blow them out too? Only if you make a really big wish. They lit the candles together, and Zoe squeezed her eyes shut, whispering something into her bunny's ear before taking a deep breath and blowing them out. After cake and 2 rounds of grilled cheese for Zoe, they wandered onto the dock. Fairy lights lined the wooden planks, their reflections dancing across the water. Tobias rested his arms on the railing, watching his daughter skip ahead with her paper crown tilted sideways. "You didn't have to do this," he said again, quieter this time. "I know. So why did you?" Dylan hesitated, the waves lapping gently below them. "Because I remember what it was like to wish someone would show up and mean it." He glanced at her. "You weren't always where you are now." "No," she said. "I wasn't." He waited, but she didn't elaborate. "I've got questions," he said finally. She nodded. "Ask." "Who are you really?" She looked at him, her pulse thudding. "You sure you want to know?" "I think I need to." She took a breath, the air suddenly thick. "I built a company. A tech platform. It started in my apartment with a cracked laptop and borrowed Wi-Fi. Now it's global. I sold it last year." He didn't speak, but his jaw flexed. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want that to be the first thing you saw when you looked at me. And now? Now I want you to see all of me. Even the parts that come with too many zeros." He was quiet for a long beat. "That day at the boutique. You let that woman talk down to you." "I did." "Why?" "Because I wanted to know if anyone would stand up for me when it looked like I had nothing." He exhaled slowly. "And I passed that test?" "It wasn't a test," she said. "It was a moment. And you changed it." He turned toward the water, his hands gripping the railing. "I've been judged my whole life for not having enough, not being enough. I never imagined being on the other side of that. I don't want you to feel like you're on any side," she said. "I just want us to be on the same page." He looked over at her. "So what happens now?" Dylan stepped closer. "That depends. Can you handle being with someone whose life looks very different from yours?" "I can handle truth," he said. "Rich or poor, I just need it to be real." She met his gaze. "It is," Zoe returned, her bunny dangling from one hand, her voice sleepy. "Can we go home now, Daddy?" Tobias scooped her up. "Yeah, baby. We're going." Dylan followed them to the parking lot, her heels clicking softly on the pavement. She opened the rear door of her car, revealing a booster seat she'd installed earlier that day. Tobias paused. "You planned that?" "I figured she might fall asleep." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're not just falling, are you?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" "You're falling hard." Her breath caught. "So are you." His hand grazed hers as he helped Zoe into the seat. "Yeah," he said. "I am." Neither of them said anything else as they drove down the coast, the city lights fading behind them, something unspoken but certain settling in the space between them, the kind of certainty that didn't need to be explained. "Not yet." Zoe's delighted squeal echoed through the vaulted ceilings of the art museum as she darted past a massive sculpture of a bronze angel. "Slow down," Tobias called, hustling after her with a harried look. "Try not to knock over anything that costs more than our apartment." Dylan couldn't help the laugh that slipped out. "Relax." The museum's closed to the public today. Tobias looked around at the polished floors, the skylights streaking late afternoon sun across the marble. "Yeah, I was starting to wonder how we walked in without anyone checking tickets." "I made a couple of calls," Dylan said, glancing at him sidelong. "Thought Zoe might like the Egyptian wing without a crowd breathing down her neck." Zoe returned, clutching a pamphlet covered in hieroglyphs. "There's a mummy room," she whispered with wide eyes. "They said it's real?" Tobias crouched beside her. "Then we better go see it before it turns into dust." As Zoe ran ahead again, Dylan folded her arms, watching Tobias as he stood. "She's more herself here," he said quietly. "Like the world isn't trying to fit her into some tight little box." "That's what places like this are supposed to do," Dylan replied. "Make your world feel enormous." Tobias looked around again, slower this time. You really grew up far from all this, didn't you? Far enough that I had to Google what gallery chic meant the first time I was invited to one. He turned toward her, eyes steady now. I still don't know what that means. She smiled. It doesn't matter. Zoe's wearing glitter sneakers and nobody here cares. They followed her through a corridor lined with glass cases, Tobias keeping a close distance. When they reached the exhibit, Zoe practically pressed her face to the glass, whispering to her fox about ancient queens and gold masks. Dylan leaned against the railing beside Tobias. You ever think about what she'll want to be someday? All the time, he said. But I try not to paint the picture for her. I want her to draw her own. She's lucky, Dylan murmured. He didn't look at her when he spoke again. I've been trying to figure out what to do with all of this. With what? You, he said. Your world. That car you drive. The way you talk to chefs and curators like they're family friends. I don't expect you to fit into my life, Tobias. He looked at her then. That's the thing. I don't want to fit into it. I want to build something with you that belongs to both of us. Dylan's breath caught. That's not something most people would say. I'm not most people, he replied, his voice low but certain. And if I'm being honest, I don't want to keep living a life Zoe has to shrink herself for. She reached for his hand, curling her fingers into his. Then don't. You've already raised someone brave enough to run toward a mummy without blinking. He laughed, the sound warm and full and real. Yeah. She's not afraid of anything. I kind of envy that. You don't have to. You walked into my life without knowing how it would end. That takes guts. Zoe tugged on Tobias's sleeve. Can we go see the pyramid model? He nodded. Lead the way. As they followed her into the next gallery, Dylan's phone buzzed in her bag. She hesitated, then pulled it out, eyes flicking over the screen. A message from her attorney. The foundation paperwork had been finalized. Tobias noticed. Everything okay? She tucked the phone away. Yeah. Just something I've been working on. Quietly. He raised an eyebrow. I'm starting a foundation, she said. In Zoe's name. He stopped walking. It's focused on early education, she explained. Especially for kids like her. Creative, curious, often overlooked. There'll be grants for schools, scholarships for summer programs. He stared at her, unreadable. I didn't tell you before, she continued, because I didn't want to make it feel transactional. I wanted you to know it was coming from love. I don't know what to say, he said softly. You don't have to say anything. Zoe ran up again, panting. There's a secret room with stars on the ceiling. Tobias scooped her into his arms, still staring at Dylan. You're really doing this? I already did. His voice broke, just a little. You didn't have to. I know, she said. That's why I wanted to. Later that evening, they returned to Dylan's place for dinner. She had arranged for a private chef to prepare Zoe's favorite meal, macaroni and cheese with cut-up hot dogs served on porcelain plates with gold trim. Zoe twirled in the middle of the room, the city skyline glittering behind her through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It looks like a castle in here. Tobias stood by the window, staring out. Dylan joined him. Overwhelming? He shook his head. I'm just trying to catch up. You don't have to. He turned to her. I've never loved anyone who made me feel like I was standing still and flying at the same time. She stepped closer. Then hold on. He kissed her then, slow and certain, as the lights of the city flickered behind them like stars trying to reach the ground. When they finally pulled apart, Zoe clapped from the table. You're in love! Tobias laughed, pulling her into a hug. Yeah, kiddo. I think I am. Dylan crouched beside them. You okay with that? Zoe nodded. As long as you don't stop bringing cake. I think we can manage that, Dylan said. A month later, they stood in front of a small group of friends and family. Tobias's sister, Dylan's closest confidants, Zoe in a flowered dress with her fox tucked under her arm, and promised each other everything. No grand ballroom. No red carpet. Just a rooftop garden, fairy lights, and a string quartet playing softly as the sun dipped behind the skyline. Tobias took Dylan's hands in his voice low and full. "You didn't fall into my life, you changed it." She smiled, tears in her lashes. "You reminded me what it means to be seen." Zoe stood proudly between them as they kissed, the three of them tangled in a moment that felt impossibly full and finally, completely theirs. And for the first time in a long time, Dylan didn't feel like she was pretending. She felt like she was home. Zoe's laughter echoed through the stone hall as she danced barefoot across the polished floors of the old villa, her dress twirling like petals in the breeze that drifted in through the open arches. Outside, the Tuscan hills rolled endlessly into the horizon, golden under the early evening light. Tobias stepped onto the terrace, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his collar open, his gaze locked on Dylan, who was arranging a bouquet of wildflowers in a glass vase beside the long wooden table set for dinner. Her fingers moved deliberately, tucking a spray of lavender between two sun-drenched poppies. "You've never looked more like someone who belongs in a painting," he said. She didn't turn around. "You say that every time we come here." "Because every time I mean it more." She glanced at him over her shoulder. "You're getting better at this." "At what?" "Saying things that make me want to kiss you before the pasta's even served." He crossed the terrace, wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "What if we just skip the pasta? Zoe's been waiting all afternoon for fresh tagliatelle. You'll have a mutiny on your hands." "Fine," he murmured. "But only because I'm scared of her when she's hungry." She laughed, leaning back against him. "I thought you were fearless." "Only when it comes to you." She stilled, then turned in his arms. "You mean that?" "I've never meant anything more in my life." They kissed, slow and sure, the kind of kiss that didn't burn, it grounded. When they pulled apart, Zoe was standing in the doorway with her hands on her hips. "You," she said, but grinned. "Are we eating or what?" Dylan ruffled her hair as they walked inside. "Lead the way, Your Highness." Dinner was loud and joy-filled, the kind of meal where the wine flowed and the olive oil shimmered and the bread vanished faster than it could be sliced. Zoe talked non-stop about the day's adventures, her painting class in the garden, the lizard she named Leonardo, the Italian words she was trying to learn. After dessert, when the candles had burned low and the stars began to bloom across the sky, Tobias leaned back in his chair and looked at Dylan. "I've been thinking," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous." "I know. But hear me out." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "This isn't a proposal. We've done that already. This is something else." She opened the pouch and gasped. Inside was a ring, not a diamond, but a smooth band of platinum inlaid with a thin line of deep blue stone. "It's lapis lazuli," he said. "Ancient Egyptians used it to represent truth. I thought it fit." Her eyes shimmered. "It's beautiful. I wanted something that wasn't about status or tradition. Just something that says I see you. All of you." She slipped the ring onto her thumb, where it fit perfectly. "Then you should know something too." He tilted his head. "What?" "I've decided to step back from the foundation. I'm handing the reins over next month." His brow furrowed. "Why?" "Because I've spent years building things to prove I could. I want to spend the next part of my life building something that matters more. With you. With her." He reached across the table and took her hand. "You're sure?" "I've never been more." Zoe, half asleep against a cushion, mumbled, "Can we live here forever?" Dylan smiled. "We'll be here every summer." "How's that?" Zoe nodded, already dozing. Later, after she was tucked into bed beneath a canopy of gauzy linen, Tobias and Dylan stood on the terrace again, looking out over the hills. "Does it scare you?" he asked. "How fast all of this happened." "It would have," she said. "Before I met you. And now?" Now I know fast doesn't mean fragile. It means real things don't always wait. He turned to face her. Do you ever miss the life you had before? She thought about the question. About the silence of her penthouse, the constant travel, the boardrooms full of people who only saw numbers. No, she said finally. Because nothing I left behind ever made me feel this full. He kissed her forehead. Then let's keep building. They spent the rest of the summer in a rhythm that felt timeless, cooking together in the mornings, exploring nearby villages in the afternoons, painting on the terrace while Zoe narrated made-up stories about dragons and stardust. Tobias taught Zoe how to ride a bike down the gravel path behind the villa. Dylan started sketching again, something she hadn't done since college. One evening, as twilight turned lavender above the olive groves, Dylan opened her laptop for the first time in weeks and emailed her former assistant, asking her to donate the rest of her wardrobe from the penthouse closet to a young women's shelter in the city. She never looked back. By autumn, they had bought a quiet house on the outskirts of a coastal town, close enough to the water for Zoe to collect seashells every morning before school. Tobias picked up a part-time job restoring old buildings, something that made his hands dirty and his heart full. Dylan started a small local program teaching young girls how to code and build digital art. No press, no publicity, just the joy of passing it on. They never needed anything more. One night, curled up on the back porch with a blanket around their shoulders and a storm rumbling quietly in the distance, Tobias pulled Dylan close and whispered, "I never thought I'd find someone who made the word forever feel easy." She rested her head against his chest. "I never thought I'd find someone who made it feel like home." The rain came softly, tapping against the roof as the tide rolled in. And in a world where people often chase everything, the three of them had found the only thing that truly mattered. Enough.